Hello. Welcome to my channel. This time, I wanted to talk about the concept of not knowing whether or not you're attractive. Now, this is aimed mostly towards women because I feel like this whole topic is probably different if you're a man, but as a woman, especially within society, having so much emphasis being put on your looks, I feel like the concept of being attractive is just so much more prominent for women, right? So I think everyone knows about beauty standards, right? And depending on where you are in the world, they're going to change. There are some that seem to be more universal, and there are exceptions to the rules, and beauty is subjective, and at the same time, it isn't, and all of that, right? But the point of the matter is, I know it could be argued everyone is beautiful because it depends on where you are and who's looking at you and everything. Okay, fine, sure. But let's say for however you look, wherever you're at, are you considered attractive? I'm not even talking about are you considered the beauty standard because I think you're gonna know that pretty much regardless. But I do feel like even if you don't fit the beauty standard, you could be considered attractive. But I feel like maybe it doesn't get talked about very often, this concept of like whether or not you're considered attractive by other people, or situations where you grew up not being attractive or seeming like you weren't attractive, and then you become attractive later on in life, and like what that does. I know that there have been conversations about it, but at least from what I've seen, there aren't a lot of conversations about it. And maybe this is something that a lot of people can't identify with, and that's cool, but I still wanted to talk about it. The reason that I want to talk about it is because I'm someone who, I've said it before, I know I don't fit beauty standards. It is what it is, right? Like, it's reality, for better or for worse, right? But even without fitting beauty standards, I have in my life been called attractive. But it's been odd, right? Because, I'm someone who, I've never been like, uh, okay, like if we're going by BMI, I've never been on like the normal range, right? Like I've always been more in the overweight range. I've never been someone who was slim. Now, I'm not like morbidly obese or anything like that. It's not like that, but I am. I mean, okay, if I were to describe myself, or if I were to go by what other people have called me, I've been referred to as thick, right? Like in a positive way. Even though I am in a lifestyle change right now, I'm trying to lose weight because I like a certain type of look, body wise, for women. Even though I think different kinds look attractive, there's one that I really like, and if I can get that, I'll be pretty happy. But even with that, right? With me trying to get a certain type of body, despite finding various types attractive, that kind of touches on this too, right? Because um that's the thing. So if you're someone who, okay, right off the bat, you don't fit the beauty standard, right? And then maybe you were also someone who, maybe you never really got approached by people of the opposite gender, or if you did, you noticed that they're not, you know, the they're not like the best looking, uh since I'm talking about women here. They're not maybe like the, well, in a heterosexual way, but you're being approached by men who maybe, they're not the best looking men. Or if you do get approached by men who would be considered attractive, even you are kind of like, are you sure? You sure you want to talk to me? Like, even you feel a little weird about it, right? Because maybe that hasn't been your norm. It's like, how do you how do you deal with that? How do you feel about that? What do you do with that, Because I think it's interesting. Because on the one hand, you don't want to be someone who isn't confident, right? Like, you don't want to come across as someone who's unconfident, doesn't have self-esteem, etc., etc. But on the other hand, I feel like, to try to pretend that, like, certain things aren't reality, there's a certain level of delusion there too, right? I mean, maybe, I guess that's a controversial thing. Not everyone's going to agree with it. Okay, that's fine. I get it. That's cool. But my point though in general is just like, if no one's really been checking for you, or like people say okay, here's another thing too. If you're somebody who maybe people have called you attractive, right? Because like for me, I have been called, I've been called, like, even, okay, so like back in high school especially, right? Nobody was checking for me, and I didn't really consider myself very attractive. Like I said, I was on the bigger side, which, when I was growing up, being bigger was not like, at the point that we're at now in time, being thick is kind of like praised, I guess, or at least is something that people can see as a positive. Whereas back when I was in high school, that wasn't the case, right? When I was in high school, it was like, if you weren't skinny, if you weren't skinny, then you were not what someone was looking for. Which isn't to say, because like I had a friend at the time. I thought she was beautiful, beautiful girl. She was bigger than me, but I think she did. I think she did get attention from God. I don't know. We weren't like close or anything like that. Really, it was like we were just school friends. We lost contact after we graduated and everything. But just in general, there was a certain type that you went for. So even if they were finding me attractive, if we talk about like societal programming as far as, what looks you go for and what's considered good looking and isn't, yeah, they weren't gonna admit that they were attracted to me. Which, okay, I'm gonna go on a tangent for a second, and hopefully I can remember hopefully I can remember my main point after I go on this tangent, but I really want to talk about this real quick. So, there's like this whole thing with like being fat phobic, and whether or not being fat is attractive, this, that, people saying, if you're fat no one wants you or whatever. One thing that I think is really interesting about it, right, is there is this stigma against being fat. But with that being said, I feel like there are probably a lot of men who are genuinely attracted to women that are, whether you want to use the term fat, bigger, whatever term you want to use. There are men who will legitimately, genuinely be attracted to them, whether it's because those are actually the types of bodies they prefer, or because they got to know this woman personally, they fell in love with her personality, and so her look is kind of whatever, right? But because she doesn't fit what society says is attractive, he'll, he, along with, just to like fit in with other guys, he'll say like, oh, she isn't attractive, who would want her, blah 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 blah. But then behind closed doors, you know she is the woman that he actually wants, which is crazy. Like, he'll actually deny himself that, which, I mean, I feel like that goes into other things too, when, what you desire isn't what you actually put out in the forefront. And I think that's actually something else I want to talk about too, but that's another video, probably going to be the next one actually, or a live or something like that. But uh no, what I wanted to talk about, right now in general, I, despite the tangent, I actually do remember, uh is though, how do you know that you're attractive, right? Because if you, for example, you are that woman who's considered fat and guys really do find you attractive, but they're too scared to say it because of what society at large says, so you're never told that. Well, I would argue that that means that, or I guess what it doesn't mean is that you're unattractive. Okay, I'm using too many double negatives. I'm sorry. Okay. What I'm trying to say is you could be attractive, but just not know you're attractive because people won't tell you, right? But then on the other hand, see, this is where I think the other problem comes in, because I feel like you'll have people who don't tell you that you're attractive, so then you don't think you're attractive. But then there's people who will tell you you're attractive, but they're just saying that to be nice. Now, that actually is a question though. I'm not even really like making a statement about that. I do think that happens, but if anyone happens to listen to this, if you have an opinion, do you feel like people on average will give someone a compliment about being like pretty or beautiful or gorgeous or whatever? Will they say that about a person that they don't find attractive just to be nice? Or do you think that that's something that people don't really do? Like, yeah, people will, say stuff just to be nice, but they won't go that far. Or do you feel like there's levels to it, right? Like, so for example, if somebody thinks that someone is okay, because then there's even levels to the attractiveness. But like, okay, say there is a woman, right, and you consider her to be maybe like plain looking, right? Do you think that people would say, like just say that a bunch of people would in general say, okay, this woman is a plain looking woman? Do you think that people would say to her, despite the fact that she's just plain, say, oh my gosh, like you're pretty, or you're so pretty, or girl, you're beautiful? Do you think that that's something that happens on average? And if so, do you think that, like, so when I'm talking about levels, right? So this girl, if she's considered plain or average, right? Because she's not considered unattractive, is saying that she's pretty, right? Is that acceptable? Because, well, she's not unattractive, therefore me calling her pretty isn't like a big stretch. And if you agree with that, then would you say that because this girl is, average or plain, if you were to call her gorgeous or beautiful or very beautiful, is that a stretch? Right? Because, if we've already said this girl, she's pretty much plain, um, if you say, oh, you're very beautiful, is that a big deal? Or, is it not? And also the same for, like, say this girl, she isn't even average or plain, she would be considered unattractive, right? Or like, and okay, let me say this too, as far as finding this girl average or plain or unattractive, it could be by society standards, or it could be by your standards, or if you don't want to put yourself personally in this position, the person who's given the compliment. If this person finds, this girl average or below, right? So if she's unattractive, you know, do you think people, again, people who are thinking that this girl's unattractive, will they still say, oh, girl, like, you're pretty or you're beautiful, whatever? Do you think that that's something that happens on average? This is a real legitimate question. I'm not being I can't even think of the word. Oh man. Rhetorical. There we go. That's the word I was. I'm not being rhetorical. This is a real question. Do you think that that is something that happens? Because I actually wonder about that. Because when I get compliments, I'm always like, is this genuine? Is this not? Especially because I think one thing about women, and I guess this is a controversial thing to say, but I still feel this way. And if anyone disagrees or agrees, feel free to let me know. But I feel like women, a lot of times, want to say positive things, whether it's true or not. And I don't really necessarily know where that comes from. I don't know if that's like feminine nature or what, but I feel like there's always, or for the most part, there's this urge to always say something nice, and which I don't agree with either, because I feel like that's toxic positivity. And maybe I'll do a video on my opinion on toxic positivity one day too, and how I feel about that. I know that's not exactly that, but I feel like it does fit into that category. But still, if you're saying something just to be nice, but it's not true, I feel like that's still hurting the person, because if you're real with somebody, then it at least gives them the opportunity to learn and grow. You know what I mean? Because if somebody, like, if there's a problem, but someone never says there's a problem, then how does the person ever know to fix it? You know what I mean? Like if you took your car to the dealership and then they told you, okay, everything's fine, you're thinking everything's fine. If there's a problem with the car, you don't know that you need to try to go get it fixed. I know this ain't the perfect example, but you get my point. Like, if no one's telling you there's an issue, and it's not something that's very obvious to you, or even if it is, but people are telling you it's not, then either you're being gaslit, or you're just really thinking like, okay, there's not a problem. you know and it's like, so then you're robbed of the opportunity to improve. So, and unfortunately, I feel like, so when it comes to women giving other women compliments, it's not necessarily, I feel like, the most genuine thing. But on the other hand, a man giving a woman a compliment still also isn't necessarily the most genuine thing, because we don't know where that's coming from. Like, if a guy says, hey, beautiful, or whatever, my personal opinion on that is it's just something that guys say. Like, it's just a thing. I don't know that it really even means that much. It's just like something that you say just to indicate that you are romantically interested. Kind of like when people ask you how you're doing, but they don't really want to know how you're doing, which, again, that's a whole nother video that I may or may not ever do. But it's, there's just certain things that are said that are just said. So, like, a guy saying that you're beautiful or whatever, he could mean it. He could not mean it. He could be, exaggerating. Maybe not. But, how do you know? And the thing is, because of all of that, right? If you're someone who, either for your whole life, you've never really been called attractive to any degree, in any way, or if you spent, like, maybe the beginning of your life not being called attractive, or maybe you did, but just a little bit, but then later on you start to get called attractive, or or if people do say you're attractive, but you feel like you don't really see it, in the sense of, like, so I'm gonna touch on pretty privilege a little bit here, but there are a lot of topics about pretty privilege, whether or not it exists, etc. Um, Interestingly enough, I watched one video where a woman was talking about how she feels like maybe pretty privilege doesn't exist and it's really just racism, which that was an interesting. I thought that was a really interesting video. I'm not gonna get into that right now, but uh, my point though is, if you, I feel like if you are considered attractive, then if pretty privilege is to be believed, there are certain ways that you can tell that you're attractive. Like there are certain things that will happen and you kind of just know that you're attractive. You know what I mean? And so if those things aren't happening to you, then I feel like it's really easy to start questioning, am I actually attractive? Am I pretty? Am I really? Because I know people tell me this, but I feel like when I'm moving through life, it's not really reflected, Like, I'm not, you know, nobody's really checking for me. I'm not getting anything for free. And then, maybe people are not. And here's another thing, too, right? Because me, I'm gonna be honest, I don't know if I experience pretty privilege or not, right? Because even if it's subjective and not like a racist thing, like I kind of mentioned before, and it's like just a person finding you pretty, and the stuff that they'll do because they find you attractive. Even with that being the case, if I do at least at times benefit from pretty privilege, I can't even tell because I feel like I don't really have anything to compare it to, in the sense, okay, so like a lot of times it'll just seem like people are nice to me, like they'll open the door for me or they'll let me go in front of them or something like that. But I don't know if that's really a pretty privilege thing or that's literally just I'm a woman and, men just are being, chivalrous or whatever. They recognize that I'm a woman, so they let me get in front of them or they hold the door open for me. I don't know, though, because maybe that's not the way men move on average. Because if I am benefiting pretty privilege, right, and that stuff happens to me pretty often, then obviously my experience is going to be different from someone who isn't experiencing that. So again, it's like, how can you really tell? How do you know whether or not your experiences are unique? I mean, I guess unless you have other people to ask, but even with that, I feel like, you know, I feel like the problem a lot of times with trying to do tests like this is I feel like it also depends on the individuals that you're around, because if a guy opens the door for me, right? And he did it because, for him it's like, well, that's just what guys do for girls. They open doors for them. Then okay, it didn't matter, right? So then if like another girl encounters a different guy who doesn't share those values, right? Then she's not going to have the same experience. So I think, but at the same time, if she encountered the same guy that I did, then she would. On the other hand, if a guy just opens the door for me because, he thought I was pretty, but then another girl, he didn't think that she was pretty, so he didn't open the door. Well, there could be another guy who thinks the exact opposite. Basically, my point is that it's very hard, really, to do accurate studies. I feel like just in general, not even just about attractiveness, just in general when it comes to how things work in society. Like when you run tests, obviously the more tests you run, um, the more accurate the data can be. But you want to try to keep things, I feel like you want to try to use the same control subjects and everything. Now I'm getting into science. But no, I'm just saying, like, it's I feel like it's really hard to tell, and I am very curious about other people's opinions on this, other people's experiences and perceptions, things that people have gone through, uh even the opposite, where, like, if you're a woman who is convinced, like, no, I'm definitely unattractive, I'm really curious, you know why do you think that? Why are you sure that you're unattractive, or why are you sure that you are attractive? Essentially, like, I'm just wondering, like, what sort of experiences are people having to lead them to certain conclusions? And also, does it matter? Like, I feel like, the obvious answer is to say, okay, yes, obviously it matters, because in society, looks matter, whether people want to admit it or not. There's been studies that show that, attractiveness does affect, how you move in society, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but I do feel like there are instances where maybe, it doesn't really matter, or it doesn't matter as much, or maybe there are other contributing factors, you know. And another thing too, that I just, I thought about this again. I feel like another way it could be kind of hard to tell if you're attractive is, like, what if you're an attractive person, right? Now, I know that a lot of times you hear about all the positives that come with being attractive, but then there are negatives too that people don't want to talk about, which, I get it. But one of the things, if you're attractive, you hear about people being nice to you, but what about when people are mean to you? Especially, like, if other women are, like, jealous of you, jealous how you look, whatever. So then they're mean to you. And it's like, you don't know that they're being mean to you because they're jealous. So you might think literally the opposite. You might be thinking, okay, well, they must be being mean to me because they think I'm ugly. Because, well, they say that, unattractive people get treated worse. Therefore, I must be unattractive. Even though in reality, it's the exact opposite. So, again, I'm just wondering, like, how would you be able to tell? Would you be able to tell? And even if you can tell, if you are attractive, but in your life all you've experienced are the negative sides of it, then it's if you think about it that way, it's not even an advantage. It's not even an advantage to be attractive. In that, scenario where you're only experiencing the negative aspects of it, which is pretty messed up in my opinion, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I'm just curious. So if anyone happens to listen to this, you have any sort of opinions, any sort of uh I guess, like, experience with this, whether you, like I said, you grew up feeling attractive, not attractive, or if there was a shift, and if there was a shift, you know, how or why? Do you feel like your race plays a role? Uh, any of that, right? I'd be really curious to know. This is a topic that I really could talk about for a pretty long time. And I feel like these videos are just getting longer and longer. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I can talk for a while. Like, I'm, I'm one of those people who I either have nothing to say or everything to say. So, my, these things can tend to get kind of long. I try not to make them go too long, but this one kind of did, because again, I do have a lot to say about subjects like this. But hey, if you have an opinion, anything you want to add to the conversation, anything maybe you want me to think about or consider, please let me know. I am really open to it. I like to hear different opinions. And yeah, maybe I'll end up doing like a follow up video depending on if you give me something new to think about. Either way, I'll be in a I'll be in another one. Hopefully you will join me and hopefully you enjoyed this. Thank you for listening and have a good one.